Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, and oh my goodness, what we have been creating in our magical team here at Team Secret Witch as we prepare for birthing our archetypal apothecary path is really just incredible. I'm literally so excited to see what we're creating with this new methodology, which actually isn't so new as it's been a long hard work in progress and it is a culmination really of the last 2 years of beta testing the path of the Secret Witch. So I'm delighted to share with you a little bit more about it with the precision and clarity that we have been working on. We've seen that most magical women shame and suppress their healing gifts due to the fear of being persecuted, outcast, and chased out of the village with pitchforks. Archetypal Apothecary is a unique method that guides you from relying on others to fix this witch wound to owning your power to become your own self-healing remedy, which magically has you not only fully express your soul, but discover and embody the unapologetically magical healer your soul was born to be. And we do this by using deep archetypal personality profiling grounded in the lineage of homeopathic remedy personalities as a model to stimulate healing and kindle self-inquiry to help you see the places you suppress who you are so you can embody and express your truth. If that is something that is calling to you, of course, that is what we're dosing in every episode anyway, so keep listening in. You can also join our Secret Witch Circle group, and we have recently rebirthed our Lunar News, which is our newsletter that goes out each month on full moon with a gorgeous ritual that you can choose into from the wonderful Bonnie. It's got loads of juicy content and tips on how to begin walking the path of deep self-healing and contains all that you need to know. So if that is calling to you, you can sign up at nicolebarton.co.uk/sign-up. For now, let's dive into the episode. So, on The Secret Witch Show today, I am exploring how magical women can keep their truth hidden due to the fear of failure, and how they can work with the Archetypal Remedy Aurum to lovingly heal their sense of failure, harnessing it as material for their liberation. In this episode, we explore how often the fear of failure can hold women back from even dreaming their big dreams, and how it can actually be a powerful healing portal to transformation and liberation of our true selves and our full expression of our soul's vision. Let's dive in. Hello, magical ones, and welcome to the show. Today we're discussing how to heal your fear of failure and meet your edge anyway. And this is one of those topics. I'm going to say remedies because essentially there's a remedy state that we're talking to here that has been such a healing remedy of mine. Failure has been one of the biggest, deepest fears of mine. And of course, as this is the kind of ongoing work all of the time, this can also still be a remedy state that I spiral into deeper and deeper layers of healing around. So yeah, I deeply know the fear of failure, and I feel your heart. If you're listening to this and really feeling in those wounds, I really feel you. It is one of my deepest, as I say, fears, and it's also likely, and this is because it's been my fear, and I'm here to guide women who are that phosphoric witch, who's that born as that constitutional phosphoric witch. It's also likely one of the deepest fears of the phosphoric witch, who in essence really wants to discover and become her magical healing gifts in the world. And it's one of those fears that can often really stop a woman taking aligned action on those soul aligned nudges to become who she was born to be. And yeah, as I said, failure is a remedy. We can often think of these things that we don't want, these things that we don't like about ourselves, as pains to be fixed. And I've been talking a lot about this recently, because one of the ways that I've seen that the Archetypal Apothecary path differs to other paths is that we are here to initiate you into becoming your own self-healer through archetypal remedies. I'm going to speak to that a little bit more in a minute, but essentially, often these things that the other paths in the self-help world look at, they often look at them as things to eradicate, things that we want to avoid, things to fix. And so failure is never usually seen as a remedy. And there is a specific Archetypal Apothecary remedy for this core wound. Archetypal Apothecary is the path that we dose here at Team Secret Witch. And this particular remedy of failure is one of the core, what we call collective manifestation layer wounds that we dose as part of our path, which means essentially that it's one of the main witch wounds. It's one of the deep fears that the secret witch, who is essentially hiding her magical self-expression, is here to experience and to learn to heal, so that she can liberate that and become the full natural expression of who she is, i.e. magical, unapologetically magical at that. So failure really is one of those wounds that's often in the way of her just being who she is. It's one of those wounds that is what has kept her secret, in essence. And so in this path, as I mentioned, we work with these kind of energetic remedies, and how they work is essentially they use deep archetypal personality profiling. These remedies each have their own little personalities, grounded in the lineage of homeopathic remedy personalities, because that's my medicine, although I dose them energetically, as a model to stimulate healing and kindle self-inquiry to help you see the places that you are suppressing who you are, so that you can embody and express your truth. And that's the work really that we are doing in this path. That's the way that we dose. So the remedy that we will be dosing in this podcast episode today is the remedy of failure, and that failure remedy is the remedy of Aurum Metallicum. And Aurum Metallicum is the Latin name for gold, and this remedy as a personality has wounding themes of failure and duty. I've talked about this a little bit in our Secret Witch Society group, so I'm just going to go a little bit deeper in here, and I don't always dose remedies through the podcast, but you'll probably notice me bringing Aurum alive today throughout the podcast. So I always say when I'm dosing remedies, and I'm always dosing remedies essentially, but when I'm consciously dosing them, I really do bring that with a warning of, like, if you do not want to work with this remedy, it's probably a good idea that you stop listening, because this is a remedy that I am going to bring alive, and that is how we dose. There's other ways. We have like energetic transmissions, we have rituals, we have practices, we have inquiries, we have invocation rituals, and all sorts of things that we work more deeply with within our containers, within our crucibles. But as I'm bringing a remedy alive, it's still kind of giving you a low potency dose of it. So in terms of Aurum, it is actually a metal. And as part of the path, we also have, I've taught this before in Medicine Woman, we have Archetypal Apothecary Queendom. So Aurum is part of the Metal Queendom, which essentially has themes of perfection. So you can really start to get a picture when metals are very shiny, they're very brilliant. There's that kind of real kind of energetic of being perfect, of being kind of the top in the class, the really shiny, polished version of ourselves. So when we think about that, that is pointing towards what Aurum Metallicum as a remedy is all about. That energetic of the element of gold, in essence, which means it's shiny. And in its natural non-altered state, it's pure beauty. It's naturally abundant, and you could say essentially in its natural state, it's perfect. And people in this state, and they may just be in this kind of collective layer wounding, or it may be deeper their unique remedy, which is the remedy that we've come here to live out in order to dose into the world. So that could be wounding that becomes alchemized into our gifts. We often have sort of one core unique remedy, which is around our core wounding. So it can either be like surface layer wounding that's not as deep, or it could also be core wounding. But these people who are in an Aurum state, who experience fear of failure, who have had experiences of things that they feel were failures, they often tend to be, as gold is, naturally gifted in some way. But because of that, the world tends to expect a lot from them because they've always provided that really high standards. They're constantly living up to this expectation of being shiny, perfect, beautiful. And in that respect, they learn that they have to be perfectionists, and they become deeply fearful of failure. And I share this because this is deeply where I have been. This is something that really, really has been part of my journey, this alchemy of failure. And this kind of deep fear of failure is essentially that wounded shadow expression. They have this deep sense of duty, this deep fear of failing in the world. Aurum also has a remedy, has a kind of likening to the sun. If you think about the colour of gold and the sun, it's also the archetypal story of Icarus too, the boy who flies too close to the sun. In that they almost get so close to the sun and so close, like they achieve so much that they can't live up to those expectations that they are feeling of themselves, and then they at some point have to choose to fail others' expectations. Otherwise they'll be costing themselves their health. And that fall, when they fall from like really chasing the gold, chasing the sun, can be really experienced as their fault, and that can really become a trauma for them. And this commonly shows up for magical ones as in a few ways. That it can show up as them feeling burned out from fear of failing at whatever she's doing. It can show up as having high standards of herself and worrying about not living up to them. So like we talked about, strand of perfectionism. It can show up in the woman who takes so much responsibility in her family's lives, in her career, in all sorts of places, and they might use a lot of the kind of I should language instead of following what's aligned for her. And when I say that, I don't mean in a rebellious way. I'll talk to that a little bit later, but typically there's a lot of I should, a lot of sense of duty. There's often a lot of hustling hard to bring, if they're a healer, if they're trained as a healer, and they may just at this point be kind of tiptoeing into the healing world. But if they're already a healer and they've trained in a lot of healing practices, they may be hustling hard to bring their healing business to the world because they'll have this heavy sense that they will be a failure. So they're kind of fighting against that fear of failure in creating a business, which can really feel to threaten their security. Or they could also not be taking any action at all, even if it is aligned, because she can often be scared of failing, and that can kind of paralyze her as well. And also another way that this can show up, and this could be in early stages even of you kind of becoming your gifts, is that sometimes you may not even know what feels aligned. There can be that real disconnect from the body in Aurum, because sometimes that fear of failing can show up in a way that she can't even dream. So often an Aurum state woman will not even let herself dream because she's so scared of flying high and falling like Icarus. So there's that fear, that deep fear of failing, stopping her from even dreaming about what's possible, about what's desired. And she can also heavily judge herself. And often also another way that Aurum shows up is that after a wounding of this kind, sometimes she will retreat into a depression, and this can be after some kind of experience that was deemed by herself to be a failure, and at that point she'll kind of sink into this darkness. And when you're in that state as well, it does not feel like a nice place to be. This fear of failure, I know myself, is really, really horrible and can lead to spiraling thoughts, panic attacks, anxiety, a sense of doom. And these are all Aurum state manifestations from the underlying shadow and wounding of fear of failure. And so our work here in this path is of healing that. And that's what this episode's all about. That was a very long-winded introduction to explain that. So essentially, as with all archetypal remedies, there is a healthy gold expression of the Aurum state, as well as that kind of shadow wounded state. So, and it's kind of ironic that we call it the archetypal gold, in that our gifts, our gold, the gold that we're using here is our term for the gifts that can be found in the darkness. And Aurum really is the full embodiment of that. That is the full expression of this Aurum state, is by going into the darkness that we feel when we're in that failure and alchemizing it into gold. That is the whole alchemical process that we teach as part of Archetypal Apothecary Path here at Team Secret Witch. So working with this remedy is really one of the core remedies to begin, to begin alchemizing all of this. And this is a crucial part. This is not by bypassing and skipping to the gold, as many self-help fixes can often invite us to. It is by it's also, just to add, it's also not by going into the darkness and staying stuck there. But this is by deeply loving and welcoming all parts of your darkness that have been hidden and shamed, and really learning to heal these parts of yourself that are simply begging for you to love them. Because underneath all of these fears of failure, there is usually other stuff that wants to be illuminated, wants to be loved, wants to be seen. It's really different for everybody as well. And still, when the Aurum woman has healed her wounds here, this is the reason why we do this work. If she can lean into that edge of loving herself in her fear of failure, the gift is that this woman becomes the purest expression of gold in her natural truth. So what that means is, in her natural, authentic, truthful expression, she is just perfect. And this is actually, funnily, in my gene keys, it's actually my life's work. It's distilled in gene keys as truth. So the shadow of this is exactly Aurum, in that there's kind of this perfectionism tendency, and the gold of it is that in our naturalness we end up being perfectly truthful and perfectly perfect. so when a woman learns to express that Aurum gold, just be who she is, she's actually perfectly the medicine for the world that she has come here to be, and for herself. And instead of operating from that perceived sense of duty, she becomes devoted to living from soul, and, as I said, not in a rebellious way that is often taught in many self-help fix approaches, but from love, which is possible. So she can own her natural magical healing powers, and she can become who she was born to be, i.e. a phosphoric magical one. So Aurum, essentially, if we talk about the onion analogy, phosphorus is who we're born as. It's like who we are at our core, and then all these different layers get added over these different wounds and different traumas. So Aurum is one of those layers that's in the way of a magical one being her sensitive, otherworldly, magical, phosphoric constitution, who she's here to be. And that's the importance of doing this work, to really alchemize that. So Aurums, though, are naturally gifted, as I mentioned. So they're naturally gifted healing remedies when they can take aligned action from and live from their truth, rather than who they are trying to live up to being. And I think of my own personal journey. When I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking about my own journey with Aurum, very much being that fall from my perfectionist standards when I was ill with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I'd worked my way up into the corporate ladder as a brand manager, and really became ill from suppressing my soul, and I was just unconsciously not living from soul. So this was really one of my major initiations into soul, and it really did at the time feel like that deep, dark fall from the sun that Icarus represents. You know, I'd been an A-star student for most of my life, like the archetypal good girl, like really hardworking, really like made sure that I ticked all my boxes. And to fail, as I saw it at the time, at a job because I was ill, just felt like the worst failure that could ever possibly have happened to me. And the thing is, whilst it really didn't appear at the time this way, it was actually a gift. And I say that fully and consciously without trying to bypass the experience that I had at the time, because it really was an initiation, and initiations are not rosy. They are this deep, dark descent into soul, as talked about in the heroine's journey. And it really was that initiation that felt dark, like I fully lived into all of the things I just told you about Aurum. But it was also the initiation that allowed me to actually follow what was in my heart and journey into healing. And healing, of course, being the medicine that I'm here to dose. It was something that I'd always struggled with, or something that I've been living into for my whole lifetime. But essentially that journey began over 10 years ago, in this initiation and into that deep core of my soul. And it's really why I am living my soul work now, dosing my medicine into the world. Because if I had continued to strive through my chronic fatigue to live up to Aurum's ideals, to push myself to go into work when I felt like it just wasn't possible, I was really, really burned out. If I had continued to do that, to live that sense of duty, that kind of shell of a person that I put on as a mask, that came from that underlying fear of failure, I have no doubt that I'd still be a brand manager today and still be likely very ill. So yeah, we often think, and this is why I say it's really important not to bypass the fact that that experience was like hell to me, and it was also a gift. We often think that there's an either or, it's either hell or it's a gift. And really it's both. And the feminine, the path of the feminine, is really one of holding the paradox of everything. When something looks binary, it's very often coming from shadow. So one thing to note, as I said, is that when you are in this Aurum trauma, when you're in that wounding, when you're in it deeply, it does not feel like a gift. So that is really, really important, because we don't want to bypass this. A lot of the work, as I said, of magic in this path is holding that paradox. And in this case, that paradox is that of holding and tending our fears. So allowing ourselves to go in and in and in to this trauma, whilst also really focusing in the direction of the gold and embodying what we're here to embody. That's like our souls, essentially. So that very much does not look like going in and sitting there. We go in embodying the kind of the gold element and allow that to hold us as we go into the childhood wounds that have led us to be in this state as well. So one of the states that Aurum can go into when she's in her failure is a deep and dark depression, as I said. And that's really why women who've been in this state do come to discover that this journey is all about alchemizing the darkness into gold. Which actually magically, and I say magically because this episode is literally chosen by our group each month, and there were 2 other options, but this was the one that was chosen. And it's really interesting because this Aurum state is actually the remedy, our theme for exploration and creation around in our Secret Witch Society group this month. So that feels quite magical. And just speaking to being in that dark place, like when we're in that place and when we've spent a lot of time in that place, which often the witch has come here with wounds to heal. It can feel really edgy to begin to focus on the gold for an Aurum. And I know this because one of the things I've seen very recently is how I hold old stories, what are called old stories, these wounded stories about joy and about being my full radiance. So as an example, my dad left when I was 4. You probably heard me share that before. And I'd been expecting a baby sister who my parents had adopted. And I'd kind of wrapped her up this red fluffy pencil case and was really excited for this sister to arrive. And because he left, she couldn't come. And from that experience, I created a story that even when good things were expected, bad things would happen. And this had me really shut down my receivership of anything good, because as soon as I expected something good, I would really expect something bad to happen. And so this story shut down my receivership of Aurum's gold. And I saw even more deeply recently that I then, because I got so much love from my mum in this circumstance, I learned innocently, because I'm going to use a word that sounds a bit harsh here, I became a martyr. And it's quite perfect because if you think about the witch, she was a martyr. So this is literally the pattern I came here to live out. So I say it with complete love. Like when I first discovered that that's the pattern that I was living out, I was like, oh no, don't want to be a martyr. And then I was like, no, that's the place that you want to love. So it really, I really had to go into that and realise that martyr in me wanted some love. And I saw that I collected like a guilty pleasure of love and attention and all the benefits from being in the darkness rather than in my gold. And so to choose into being in my gold meant choosing out of that martyr pattern and all of the love and attention that it got me. So that's why it's edgy, because to choose to embody our gold, we have to be willing to give up all those, we call them existentially kinky pleasures, as in Carolyn Elliott's book, Existential Kink. We have to be willing to give up all of those guilty pleasures that we receive. And it sounds weird to say because you wouldn't necessarily consider like being a martyr having pleasures, but there are. And we have to give up those things that we receive from being in the darkness. And as I say, that sounds like quite a bold thing to say, but I really have recently been creating around this and been creating an appreciation list as a way of beginning to liberate this at an edge that I felt comfortable with. I'm going to talk a little bit more to that later because we're also talking about meeting your edge in the fear of failure. But I've been meeting my own edge in that, in terms of allowing myself to experience joy and gold, you could say, because my Aurum shadow wanted to convince me that each time I appreciated something, quite literally it felt like someone would die if I allowed myself to be joyful. Like it would be my fault that someone would die if I was appreciative, which is one of my old stories. And if there was some kind of weird superstitious story that stemmed from my fear of failure, in a weird, kinky way. I'd created that my responsibility as a healer, because that's my gift, felt like keeping everyone alive. And that's quite a hell of a responsibility to hold, to be perfectly honest with you. So that was a really juicy one to see. So how do we meet our edge in alchemizing this is the next question. And essentially, the most loving answer is, and we are all about love here in this path, this is one of the things that's really, really crucial to the alchemy, is loving ourselves. And this is literally where we start. So we start where we're at and we love ourselves there as deeply as we can, is the short answer to that. Now, of course, that doesn't sound very tangible, so I'm going to go into that a little bit more. But it is ultimately the truth of it. And I really noticed last night I went wreath making for Christmas, and I noticed whilst I was there actually that once, because I'd never made a wreath before, and as creative as I am in life, I'm not your kind of typical art and crafter. I say this, I mean, the wreath that I made was absolutely beautiful, which just epitomises the typical Aurum kind of in a nutshell, really, because I would have had this deep fear once of going with a group of women and making a wreath when I had absolutely no idea how to create that. I mean, to be quite honest, at one point it would have been hard for me, it would have been an edge for me to leave the house for fear of failing some way on the way out the door. So there's that, but also I just noticed last night how once going to a wreath making exercise activity like would have really been truly deeply edgy for me. And it was just nothing. It was like I just played with it and just enjoyed it and created the most amazing wreath, which is typical of Aurum, like when we're in our natural truth and we just play. And there's a bit of an energetic charge that can be shadowy with play, because it can also give a sense of like not being intentional. So I'm not meaning it in that way. It was like an intentional playing, but it was like a lightness around creating it. And of course, I created something that was just truly naturally perfect. So that was a real sign of my expansion. And just to contrast that into what my edge might be now, because we're talking about leaning into our edge, my edge is leaning in and birthing my archetypal apothecary methodology to the world, and risking people not feeling its medicine, not liking it, not, being like critical of the truth, all of those fears of Aurum. And both of these places, so again, we're talking about the same archetypal remedy in both examples. Like an earlier example would have been me going out wreath making. I still would have experienced some Aurum shadow in that. And now there's the deeper, really birthing my truth, my medicine, my methodology into the world, and fearing that deep failure in business. And that is something that is a great example of how this theme, this wound, can show up in our lives, and we'll just meet the edges of that fear, and then there's always a deeper layer. So this really is a living into the healing and meeting ourselves where we're at. So these are both places where fear of failure can show up, and my invitation as the first step is to begin to notice, what does your edge look like? Like, what is your edge? Where do you notice this fear of failure showing up in your life? Where does it hinder you from really being yourself? And begin to notice that and love it. And to even notice it, you'll need to love it, because if we're not able to love ourselves in that fear, we're not going to be able to see any more about it. Nothing is going to be revealed to us. It's going to remain unconscious. So how do we lean into the edge? And I just want to speak to this a little bit, because we expand into our edges little by little. And I share this because what I usually would advise my women to do is meet an edge that feels like a 7 out of 10 edge. And this is because we want to make sure that our nervous systems can handle it. And by the way, that includes tending your nervous system as you're meeting that edge. So often, really, I've actually just jumped into that, what I want to say before that is, this is a later down the path step, this meeting an edge, this expanding into your edges, because the pre-work of noticing, loving, like choosing, which I'm going to go into as well, whether this is an aligned edge to even liberate, is the deepest work of all. So what I'm about to say is a little bit later down the path, and I don't know why I've just started to talk about it now, but we're with it, so we'll go here. But the reason why I brought that up is because some self-help fixes often advocate that kind of just jump into your fear and liberate them, kind of like gung-ho, let's just do it. Again, this can kind of have like this little rebel vibe with it that we often talk about. And the reason why I say meet a 7 out of 10 edge is because if we go full gung-ho into our edge and we do 10 out of 10, it's likely going to have an impact on our nervous system. If we are living like this all of the time and ignoring the wounds, which tends to be what happens in these kind of approaches, like just feel the fear and do it anyway, is the kind of catchphrase that I'm speaking to here. It's really dismissing the scared, sacred parts of us, our little girls' inner fears, inner wounds, that want some loving tending and acceptance. This path is not about fixing our fear of failure by jumping in and just facing our fears in a way that pushes ourselves beyond our edge. I used to teach yin yoga. I trained in Bali, and believe me, that was an edge. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. But again, there was the talk about like meeting a 7 out of 10 edge. There was talk in yin because it's very yielding, but it's also we're holding the postures for a long time. So if you've done yin yoga, there's often this talk of meeting our soft edge, and that's very much to me how it feels to be meeting an edge that's 7 out of 10, like a soft edge. Like it's not the hard edge of like 10 out of 10. It's like just a little bit back from that, meeting a soft edge in the way that's like it's deep. And this is only on edges that are deeply aligned, so there's a whole exploration of that as well. But if you are meeting an edge and it is an aligned one, so just caveat that by saying you have to choose that edge consciously. That's part of the problem, which I'll speak to in a moment. When we're meeting that edge, it wants to be a soft edge. And so this isn't about just jumping in and facing all our fears in a way that pushes ourselves. And it's equally, that's one end of the polarity, it's equally not about the opposite end of that polarity and not facing our fears at all. So again, we often have the secret witch will swing between two shadow poles often, and the deepest invitation is to jump off the pole. I say jump, I don't mean it quite so aggressively. Elevate, let's elevate off the pole into what is aligned. What is the soft edge that's aligned for our souls? Not on the pole where we're like either facing our fears or not facing our fears. What is the edge that's aligned for us to meet? And in particular, in relation to our soul's vision. Challenge is, of course, that we need to know our soul's vision to know what's in alignment. And as I said, one of the wounds of Aurum is that often she won't allow herself to even see her vision because she's scared that she'll fail at it. So the challenge is, much of the time, women don't actually know what is aligned for their souls, because we're used to logic, we're used to shoulds, we're used to fearing, even dreaming, because we're scared that we're going to fail. So this path is that of getting you back in touch with your own wisdom and helping you to heal the wounds in the way of you even seeing your vision, one of which is the fear of failure. So typically what happens is when the fear of failure comes up, secret witches will go into trigger. And this could be what I described as the darkness earlier. This could be panic attacks. It could be whatever usually shows up for you when you're in fear of failure. And the deepest invitation is to see that this trigger is always what we call material for your liberation, or sometimes I call it healing response, in that this is something that is coming up for you to see, for you to love, as material for your liberation in order to be healed. It is a response to something that has activated something in you that wants healing. Now the challenge is that the witch tends not to see the darkness as this, and this is why pausing, and this is the most important thing, is like pausing and seeing that any place where we feel fear, and that can show up as tension in our bodies, which often witches aren't able to tune into because they've shut down the bodies, they've shut down their connection to their bodies because it's too scary, in case they hear something they don't want to hear, and that's not safe because they're fearing that they're going to fail. So often they would disconnect from their bodies because of that very fear. But it's one of the ways that we can see where we're holding fear is what's the sensation going on in our bodies. That's where we talk a lot about nervous system tending, and it can often be seen in our intense emotions, our anger, or however else our triggers show up. And I am illuminating this because these triggers are a call for love, and a call for love from ourselves. And we've kind of been conditioned by the modern world to think that this is a call to either rebel against the thing that's triggered us, or it might be a person against that other person, or to bypass the thing or the person. So either almost like fight or flight. And this is why the nervous system tending is really, really important. So tending our nervous system when our triggers show up, really owning like, I'm in fear right now. What's the fear? Like getting curious about what that fear is and allowing ourselves to be in that fear. And as I say, at this point, you kind of have two options. And usually whatever option is chosen is often chosen unconsciously. Which is why the deep work is really making this all very conscious with the most love possible. So what happens usually is, one, these are the options, we can treat it as material for liberation, i.e. when we bring that specifically in relation to failure, we can see that not anything that happens to us, for us, as us, is a failure. In fact, nothing is a failure. It's all very, very rich material to see what is wanting to be loved. So, for example, in my chronic fatigue example, I'm pretty sure that most people would reflect to me that I wasn't a failure in losing my job. And yet I still felt like that. So my shadows grabbed hold of that failure and made it look like I was a failure because I'm not loving myself in that. So the part of me that wanted love was my innocently created sense of duty and should, and underneath that, likely even more unconsciously, kind of buried a few layers down, was even the part of me that felt like I wasn't worthy of love if I wasn't successful in the way that modern society expects. And so the way that I alchemized that was by really allowing myself to love myself in that fear of failure and see what we wanted to be revealed around what was underneath that fear. And this was what I call that material for liberation. Allowing myself to go into the material, to descend into the darkness, to be with that healing response, allowed me to reveal, consciously reveal, because this was a choice this is a choice into treating things as material for liberation. That is something that without experience of the material for liberation, I wouldn't have been able to expand past those stories of not being worthy of love. Now, that's one way that we can choose into working with this material if there's a trigger. The other way, and this is a way that commonly we're conditioned into by society, so again, it's completely innocent, and especially for the witch who has been persecuted throughout her life. We talked about her being the martyr. She is literally the archetypal martyr, is that we avoid it and stay on the drama or victim triangle. which was by Cartman. I'll post a link to that. There's a great article which I actually shared around this the other day in my group actually. So I'll share the link in that for you. Yeah, essentially it's a triangle, and we go into one of the positions on the triangle. It's either victim, persecutor or rescuer. When we give away our creative power, and we very much feel in that fear of failure, when we're in that place, we are likely somewhere on that triangle. And the choice is we can either stay there, which is often what we do unconsciously, innocently, and it's completely lovable. Or we can choose, as I said, to move into it, see it as that material for liberation, go down, descend fully into illuminating what wants to be seen and loved. And that is where the healing is. And as a side note, I also recently wrote a post in my group around this victim persecutor tendency. Because what can happen in this deep work is that there can be a tendency for women to go into victim persecutor projection onto me as a guide when making choices along their path, and I'm inviting them to look at shadow. And that's because when choosing into your vision and aligned edges, we will always hit an edge. And so sometimes when I dose medicinal truth, which is again why I invite you, like, are you really here for this medicine? Like, this is why I always say don't listen to this if you are not willing to be dosed with this medicine. Is that when I dose medicinal truth, women can go into fear and closure over their wounds, often persecuting me from victim instead of moving into expansion. And I'm sharing this here because what I want you to know is this is all so welcome. And I know that it's rare to hear that, and this is why I'm really calling it out, because it really isn't typical in our culture that this is welcome, and it really is welcome here. And this is why I'm highlighting it, because it is something that is a pattern I see in witches, and it's also one, just to add, that I've been in myself with my own guide. This is a place where I have been with my own guide, projecting, like, being in victim, projecting persecutor onto her. And it can really, really block the healing process if we aren't open to healing and moving through this material for liberation. So this is why I highlight it, because this journey isn't for everyone. It does require that phosphoric fire within you, that burning desire to be able to heal, to be willing truly to stand in that fire and essentially burn down those old stories that are creating life for you and choose into embodying new ones. And the invitation is to see that this is all part of the healing journey. It is essentially the very definition of material for liberation. And the other part about this, and this is why I say it is all so welcome, is that it really helps to see that absolutely nothing is a failure if it is all material for liberation. Like, everything we experience is so welcome. And you will be loved in all of it in this path, because unconditional love is really the only way to truly heal. And that's such a rare experience these days, to be truly held in unconditional love with the intention of us reclaiming our power. And that's why it's so important for me to offer that, because that's one of the ways that you can begin to see it's possible for yourself. And there is, as I say, that willingness to be open. We need to be open in order to be able to move into our edges. So how do you begin to meet your edge and heal this Aurum failure? Fear, let's say. One of the simplest ways that you can begin is to start with simply noticing, and people underestimate the power of noticing. You start with noticing where you resonate with the Aurum personality. So being with inquiry of, like, where does Aurum show up in your life? Where do you feel in your fear of failure wounds? What does that look like? How does it show up for you? What are the symptoms? And can you love yourself where you are? And then begin to look at whether there's something that you are truly consciously available for the healing of. So when we talk about the moving off the triangle into that openness to healing, that willingness to go and descend deep into the wounds, like what are the costs and benefits of choosing that healing? And also, what are the costs and benefits of not choosing that healing? There's often some existential kink revealed in that inquiry around the benefits of not healing, particularly as well. So again, this is kind of like, firstly, noticing where you resonate with the remedy. Secondly, choosing consciously if this is something that you really want to work with. And there is a deep energetic choosing of consciously working with remedies that is required in order to go deeper. And this is a remedy that we actually dose in our crucible in the new year as well. So invoke your archetypal apothecary to help magical women begin to work more deeply with this remedy. So if you do want to go deeper, it might be worth checking out the link to that. I'll pop that in the show notes as well. If you're wanting to really kind of go into this deeply and collapse time on your healing. It was funnily one of my one-to-one clients recently said that our work was like a loving fast forward button on healing, which I loved. so that's what we're doing in the new year. But you can also begin to do this yourself just by noticing and loving yourself in the expression of this remedy. And as I say, beginning to love the parts of you that really fear failure. And also beginning to look at, this is like just being in deep general inquiry with this remedy as a lens. Like, what is the deeper fear beyond the fear of failure? What would failure mean? Like, be with the questions, live into the questions. And as you do, allow more and more and more to be revealed, but do that intentionally by being in contemplation of what aurum, what failure really means. Like, work with it as a remedy, like as a lens. Like, what is it that has stood out to you? What's come alive for you as you've been listening to today's episode? I think I'm going to leave it there. There's a quote that I wanted to read. Because as I was just talking about living into the questions, it reminded me of a beautiful quote that, quite honestly, when I first heard it a few years back, I didn't really understand what it meant. It's one of those quotes that's really meta, and it's literally explaining what happens as you come to understand it by living into it. And the reason I'm sharing this is because this path isn't linear. And often women will want that quick fix of like, do X, Y, Z and you'll be healed. And that is why going into self-help paradigms where there is a like, I'm going to someone else for fixing for them to heal me is so tempting. Like, there's a real benefit to that. And it's likely that many of you have already journeyed down that path quite far, because that's the path that I walked. It's like I basically tried every therapy possible and trained in every therapy possible in order to fix myself, until I realised, and this is what my path now offers, is that we really ultimately here to become our own remedy. So this is why we work with, when I say we dose the archetypal apothecary remedies in this path, we don't dose them in the traditional sense of like, I'm dosing them to heal you. What I do is I invite you, and yes, I'm dosing it to an extent in this because this isn't a live interactive, but when we're in the group crucibles, we're in even the Manifesting with the Moon offering that we do once a month, I will dose that remedy and invite you to invoke the energetic of that remedy for yourself. To like really, there's a way that we do this, but like really work deeply in calling in the spirit of that remedy, the spirit of gold, much in the same way that we might work with spirit guides or whatever other guides we have, like really invoking this remedy to allow it to reveal all the things that it needs to reveal to you. And this is about you learning to dose yourself. So all of our remedies are ones that I invite you to dose yourself, to learn to dose yourself, to invoke yourself. That's why we call it Invoke Your Archetypal Apothecary. And that really is the way to deep healing. There's no amount, like when we're giving our power away to other people to fix ourselves, that is us being on the triangle. We are here to own our power, to heal ourselves. That is really one of the main differences in this path. It's what makes this path unique. So there is a certain openness. This isn't a logical step-by-step process in that respect, although there are certain layers and in the way there's a deep methodology in how we dose the path, based on the kind of beta testing that we've been doing with it for the last couple of years. There is a kind of a structural, logical element to that, but as you're in the path, there's a certain openness that's required for us to alchemize, for us to create magically. We do really need that openness to the unknown, to things being revealed to us as we journey with them. And a great example of that, for example, is last night. When I slept, I often invoke my dream guides and work in my dreams to have things revealed to me. I was joking earlier about how often my women, one of the things that they'll say is, oh, I don't have time for magic. And it's like, we literally have 8 hours at night where we're not doing anything and our dream guides can come in and help us. So it's literally no excuses. But yeah, it was really magical. I was talking about something with my guide, my own guide, because I'm a firm believer that all guides need guides, in order to, especially when we're in the work of shadow work, which we're in this path, in that we can't typically see our own shadows. That's why it's really helpful to have someone to work with to help us illuminate them. But I was chatting to my own soul guide about something, and then I woke up this morning with an archetypal remedy being revealed to me in my kind of liminal dream state. And I woke up and I was like, oh, anacardium, and there was like this remedy was being channeled to me, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, that's really like answering something that I really wanted to know. And I looked at my phone, I got a message from my guide who had said, oh, I woke up at 6 a.m, which was the same time. She's like, I woke up and in my dream state I asked you a question. She was like, I asked you in my dream, like, which remedy is this an expression of? And she also said, and you answered whatever the remedy was. And it was like, literally she's not a homeopath. She doesn't really know a lot about remedies, but she basically came up with a remedy that was in essentially the same queendom as the remedy that I had, answered her in my dream. So she had actually asked me a question in her dream and I had answered it in mine. And that really is just the most perfect example of how we cannot explain how that has happened, but there has been something revealed there that was really answering something that back years ago, when I was in the work of kind of like really logical, linear, this is how things need to be, like trying to understand everything, just would not have been available to me. I'd have been trying to fix the problem rather than allowing more to be revealed through magic. It's a perfect example of us really requiring magic and an openness to magic in order for more to be revealed. So I'm going to leave it now. I said I was going to leave it probably about 5 minutes ago. I'm going to leave you there with the quote. So the quote is by Rainer Rilke. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms, and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Yeah. And again, as I said, when I first heard that quote, I had absolutely no idea what it was pointing to. So if you're like, I have no idea what she was saying, then just know that's perfect, and that is your material for liberation into the unknown. So yeah, don't go into Aurum trying to figure out, well, I'm failing because I can't get what it means. I'm just actually chuckling to myself with the fact that could actually be where the secret witch goes with that one, which is almost perfect. So yes, anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and I will catch you soon. If you do have anything to share around this episode, please do join our Secret Witch Circle group. We would love to have you in there. We're exploring the theme of Aurum as a remedy, the darkness, the gold, the gift of the gold. And we look forward to having you with us, and lots of love. Mwah. That really felt like a juicy exploration of failure. Here are my takeaways. Fear of failure is often something that stops magical women from even allowing themselves to get in touch with their soul's longings. And yet, when lovingly and consciously illuminated, we can learn to heal this fear and choose into liberating it. The archetypal remedy for this wound is Aurum, or gold, and it has the themes of fear of failure, often accompanied with perfectionism and a deep sense of duty. The irony is, the gift of this remedy state is that if you have this particular fear, it's usually because in your natural essence, whatever you create is perfect by its very nature, and all you need to do is show up as your truth. We can meet our edge in loving ways to alchemize and liberate ourselves. The key is to do this in aligned ways rather than pushing and forcing like many other methods have us do. This really is about lovingly self-healing ourselves. Our triggers are our material for liberation or a healing response. And if we choose to see them as that, this is where the opportunity for loving healing is. Mostly we choose unconsciously to not see it this way, but if we can open to it, there is so much alchemy. In order to truly heal, we need to be open to magic and the unknown, allowing more to be revealed. That really is where we will learn we can truly fly, and that our fear of failure doesn't have to lead. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.